As promised, I joined the anti-natalist community on Facebook. Um, it's it's proving I'm proceeding with caution because the thing is, as much as I have a sense of humor about anti-natalism. I mean, not specifically anti-natalism, but yeah, I have a sense of humor in general, and I suspect that sometimes my humor comes across as kind of ignorance and I have had somebody, not an anonymous person, but user on Facebook that I don't know personally, tell me that my humor comes across as ignorance, and thus, in that specific case, it came across as racism, which I completely disagree with. I think a sense of humor is actually crucial for somebody in my situation. I find that it definitely does help kind of um, ease into very difficult subjects. But like I said, it's probably to my detriment. I think people think I'm just joking about everything. Although, the thing is, if I think for anybody who knows what I'm talking about, they would see the depth to it, like almost naturally. But maybe it's just uncouth that I say things that don't seem quite that serious. Um, Anyway, enough about me. So yeah, I joined the antinatalist group, and I noticed that everything seemed fine. I'm seeing things. I'm kind of sussing things out. I'm not reposting or sharing anything too many times or too much. But there was this one post by a woman, basically saying that she's noticed that in some of these antinatalist groups, there's a lot of people who hate children, a lot of people who hate women. Um, and I don't want to be too forward with this, but like I have noticed that some of these memes seem like people who just don't like kids. Um, Now the thing is, I've also noticed that there's a lot of women in these groups, and aside from the antinatalist groups, there's a lot of Facebook groups that I've read about of women who have children and have regretted that they still love their children, but they regret that they had children. Not necessarily because they think their children are suffering, but they think that they're suffering. That the as parents, as mothers especially, are have kind of not ruined their lives, but kind of like made a life choice that drastically altered where they wanted to be and where they saw themselves being before having kids. Um, and I think a lot of people do make the decision to have kids just because it's part of our evolutionary background and foundations. Which kind of brings up the issue of consent when it comes to antinatalism as well. I don't think evolution or procreation was meant to ever be a consensual thing, and consent almost seems to be, a non-starter when it comes to procreation. That's how it's always been. And that's even forgetting that we have evolved to a point where we can have these sophisticated and complex moral considerations of procreation. Um, but it's still part of us to procreate. I mean, that's it. On the genetic level, that's how we function. So I mean, there's no doubt about that. Like I mean, that's how and, I've been noticing too, and kind of getting convinced about the animal kingdom as well in terms of suffering and what humans owe animals, or at least different species in terms of suffering or not suffering. Um, Please God, let there be aliens, let there be some other form of intelligent life out there somewhere that we will discover, before we actually annihilate ourselves, involuntarily. But we could learn something from them if they don't have that evolutionary trait of consciousness. And consciousness is another one that's been kind of like poking its head in around this whole episode I'm going through. But I have to admit that consciousness is, I agree with Sam Harris on this, and I have to say that consciousness is the most mysterious thing we know so far. I think when it comes to the three big ones, right? Free will, consciousness, and God. I think we've figured out free will, or at least in my head, I'm pretty settled about it. God, I think I'm pretty settled about God. But like Sam Harris, when it comes to consciousness, I think it remains a mystery. Um, Anyway, what was my point again? So yeah, so suffering, etc., etc. I believe it is something that happens, and I made a short little post, a little tricky little wordplay post about this as well. But suffering is part of us. I think I made a video about this too. But suffering is part of us. Um, in a way that is not really tied to either evil or good. And you know, I know there are people that try to reclaim or reappropriate those words evil, good in a more secular sense, in a more secular context. But suffering is a part of human beings, just not by any sort of divine design or anything like that. It's just how we evolved. It's a highly deterministic thing. Nevertheless, that it's not fatalist. It's not by design. Blah 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 blah. It is a very deterministic thing, and that's just the way it is. So it kind of goes back to our capacity to sort of think about the morality of suffering, etc., etc. So with the issue of consent kind of, I mean, we can't deny that we do have the capacity to think beyond our evolutionary traits and evolutionary behaviors, etc., etc. We do. I mean, as Brett Weinstein would argue, even that capacity, like and consciousness itself is part of an evolutionary trajectory. It's not like it's completely removed from it. I mean, in terms of like the argument that Brett Weinstein and Richard Dawkins have in terms of how closely tied is culture and memes and things like that to neurological underpinnings or neurological things. I know you can discount it, you can count it in. Like, I mean, I lean on the side of counting it in. Like, I mean, I do believe it's an evolutionary path, like the whole culture and consciousness. I know I'm kind of, but yeah, I think you kind of get what I'm saying. But there was a constant struggle between those things. It's not perfect, and no system is perfect. It's not that we are traveling linearly. Things diverge, things become more diverse, things go the same way, so there was no, what I'm trying to say, forgive me if I'm coming off kind of postmodern here, what I'm trying to say is there is no fatalist end or fatalist goal to the universe. And we are part of the universe, despite what some people might think. So we do have the capacity to understand suffering, gratuitous suffering, otherwise known as evil, and I think we can get over certain problems through these types of ways of thinking, and we have. I mean, there's numerous examples. You think about slavery, which continues to this day, but I mean, you think about slavery, you think about the civil rights movement, you think about labor rights, you think about children and child rights. I mean, there are modes of thinking, there are ways that people used to think about people in a very naturalistic way that just seem completely alien to most of the world today. So we can't get over these things. So yeah, it goes back to the whole anti-natalist thing. You can't, like, the suffering is just so part of us, like, it just so is part of us, and who's to say that continuing to live and procreate and create people is the right thing to do? I mean, is it? Like, I mean, by whose definition, right? So there's that, and then there was, but I think, so I saw this, I googled, arguments against antinatalism, and forgive my apathy. I really didn't look very hard for arguments against antinatalism, but I do see this argument specifically coming up again and again about how happy people are living their lives, etc., etc., which is fine. I mean, nobody's disputing that. I personally believe that. I mean, this can get into murky territory. I mean, how do you define happiness? And I've heard various podcasters and I've read different pieces of writing that talk about what happiness actually is. There's short-term happiness, there's long-term happiness, and I even forget exactly what what any of it means really. But the point being is, well, to begin with, I feel that we're kind of programmed in a certain way to feel happy about things that weren't as happy as they happened. Like I think we always experience, say, vacations as more enjoyable than they actually were. And maybe that's just anecdotal. Is that anecdotal, or is that, I don't know. But I feel like, yeah, you always remember vacations as if they were happier than they actually were. But I think that that's some sort of like self-preservation mechanism inside us. Like we tend to think that way. I don't know. I mean, I just can't imagine the survival of a specimen that is just perpetually and compoundly depressed about bad experiences. I think at some point you would have to find the silver lining or something like that. So anyway, but as I've said in previous videos too, like, I mean, when it comes to antinatalism and the asymmetry argument, the fact that there could be even just an iota of suffering totally legitimizes and validates the idea of non-existence, of not bringing a being into existence, the non-identity problem. And I think people have a hard time letting go of that because they keep going back to this argument about how happy they are, how crazy happy everybody is to be alive, blah, 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 blah. But I feel like that's maybe the first hurdle that people don't get over. And even I lie in bed sometimes and I think, wow, I am so happy watching this movie right now. I can't imagine not experiencing the beauty and the cinematography and the colors and the drama and the strife and the denouement and I can't imagine not experiencing that beauty, that wonder and all that stuff. But it's a very emotionally, a very visceral kind of a very visceral thought. But I think, like, I mean, you just have to realize that if I was never really born, there would have been no missed beauty or anything. And I think that's maybe like I don't know how I'm sure there's a word for things like that, but I'm sure that's like an intellectual jump that you kind of have to make that seems unnatural. And maybe I'm just dramatizing it because I'm new to the whole antinatalism thing, blah blah blah. But maybe that's what it is. But that is and as I'm finding with a lot of antinatalist thought, that is strikes at the very core of what it is to be human. It strikes at the core of existence, basically. So yeah, it's a bit of a rambling video I made. I'm not going to redo it, but like I said in the previous video, I think I was just waiting for the confluence of factors that would enable me to do a video, and it just came together right now. I'm probably going to go down to the coffee shop and, I don't know, get high on coffee, try to read something. But yeah, I know it was a rambling video, so like forgive me. But hopefully it made sense. I think my videos generally make sense. And I'll tell you how I know that before I sign off. I've noticed when I make videos, during making the video and right after making the video, I'm always a little bit confused when I watch the videos, like a little bit kind of like what am I talking about? Like there seems to be all these ideas swirling around and it's bubbly and like this idea comes up from here and this idea and so, like what am I talking about? I mean, I know what I'm talking about. I feel the gist. I get the message. I know what I just said. Blah blah blah. I'm not that crazy, but I'll tell you what. Months after I've not watched the video for months, like if I don't watch this video for months, and then I put it on again, whether I've been drinking, whether I've had a few, or whether I'm sober or not, I watched the video and it's a totally different experience. To begin with, there's obviously a lot of time removed, and the ideas aren't swirling and blah blah blah. But I watched the videos and they make sense. Like they in fact there's a clarity that comes through when I watch them months later, that I didn't even realize at the time that I was being that direct and clear. But I'm sure I'm just preaching to the choir here. But yeah, so anyway, this could all be in my head. This all of this, right? I mean, I could have invented all of this by myself, and I do get accused of being an isolationist. Maybe not directly, but I do get accused of being an isolationist, and they say funny things happen when you're isolated. I disagree. I'm just kind of humoring you. I disagree with my being an isolationist. I don't think I am. To tell you the truth, I think there's too many people in my life, but that's another story. But yeah. Anyway, that's all for now. Bye.